Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restriction. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
Wow. Want to welcome everyone. This is Carlos to the Gadfly Livestream. And what powerful words, and I played that for very specific
the very word
reasons.
Secrecy is repugnant.
Let me mute that real quick. So, I'm here with Ken Shurkin Jr. from shotgundemics.com, and just, a discussion in regards to those words and what those mean. And as we reflect on the 57th anniversary since that fateful day in Dallas, Ken, I want to, your history and how you discuss things and document. I think it was just invaluable to have you here today to talk about some of those things and events leading up to that fateful day. So go for it, Ken.
Morning, everyone. Yeah, it's fascinating because there are so many different aspects. Perhaps those involved, and many of them have been laid to waste in their graves on this day. But there's always some chain of information where the truth lies. Fact of the matter is that JFK was a interesting and unique type of individual. He, from the beginning, he really didn't want to become president, but his father was, of course, one of the, let's just say, godfathers of American politics, American economics over the previous 40, 50 years. And Joe Kennedy wanted a president in his family no matter what. So he, connived with the mafia. He connived with the FBI. He was part of what would be considered now the deep state. The deep state really had was in its fledgling years, being started in 1947 under the new Department of Defense Act, where the CIA, where the Air Force, where the Pentagon was reorganized, where everything was centralized. From what had been separate entities to protect the nation in their national security. That all really had its first planned and coordinated event when it came to the assassination of JFK. Now you have to look at the things leading up to JFK. What was he trying to do? Well, he knew there in 1963 that they were planning on getting us off the gold and silver standard. First, of course, was the silver standard in 1964. Because of this, he created an executive order that stated that the Treasury would certify silver as the currency of the day. The second thing he did was, unfortunately, J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, was a paranoid, corrupt clown who used the law for his own benefit. He was the one who originally kept files on everybody. He made his bones during the McCarthy years a decade earlier, the Red Scare. And his big beef with JFK was not actually with his dad, but that JFK during World War II had an affair with a German woman, what he called a Nazi woman. And so he thought that John was not, or had the opportunity to be coerced by foreign powers. Then, of course, there was the Bay of Pigs. Part of the administration, because JFK won on fraud and corruption in Chicago, in the state of Illinois, he was beholden to many in the deep state, or what would become the deep state, for his election. And as such, he had to create a number, or he had to put these members in his cabinet. The Dulles brothers, Alan and John Foster. For those who don't know their history, they were part of a law firm that was instigated the rat line and the bringing over of Nazi scientists, Nazi intelligence agents, etc. during or following World War II. and they were put into the creation of the CIA. So you can see all the individuals who were in JFK's cabinet. LBJ, the only reason that he got Lyndon Baines Johnson as his vice president was because he desperately needed Texas and all the electoral votes from Texas. Just a week leading, or supposedly a week after JFK was assassinated, LBJ was actually going to be indicted for fraud schemes he had done, land deals he had done in Texas. So he wasn't going to run as the second, a second term with JFK for the presidency. He was going to be kicked off the ticket. So you see that we have the members of his cabinet, we have his vice president, we have the head of the FBI, all wanting to get rid of JFK. Does that sound familiar?
A little bit.
Yeah, well, think about what was happening one with Reagan. Reagan was not going to have George Bush Sr. run with him a second term. Very shortly after the assassination attempt was done. Secondly, the Bay of Pigs. Now, it's kind of ironic what JFK said in his speech, because he actually went back on it. During the Bay of Pigs, John F. Kennedy was going to provide air support for the Cuban refugees here in America to retake the island. But Allen Dulles went behind his back and went to the Pentagon and said, "You're going to hold off air support. You're not going to do it." And so when the Cuban refugees tried to retake, they didn't have the air support and they got crushed. And the Bay of Pigs, of course, ended up being John F. Kennedy's greatest failure. So he's left with a choice. He could go public and not keep it secret that members of his cabinet and administration was going to, or went behind his back, and that the president was not in control of the country. Or he could take responsibility for it, that it was his choice and his decision. He took the latter. And then, of course, it wasn't until the Cuban Missile Crisis that he regained his popularity and the belief in the strength of him as president. So with Donald Trump has had many individuals in his administration. This is one of the reasons there was an article written this week that Trump has wanted to get the troops out of Afghanistan and Iraq ever since he got into office. But the Joint Chiefs of Staff behind his back did what they want to do. This is why we're still in Syria. This is what, and so what is the president going to have a pissing contest in public with members of the Pentagon, with members of the administration? No. You try to do these things behind the scenes, because we know how the media is today. The media will take anything and corrupt it into making the president look bad, even if he's in the right. So this is why you don't do anything public. But this is one of the problems Trump has had, is that, hold on a second.
You're fine.
Yeah, cough button. One of the problems that Trump has had is, who do you get for your administration? Anybody who would be capable is part of the deep state. Anybody who is smart and intelligent, they don't have the connections, and the bureaucracy would run roughshod over them. So he's in the catch-22. That's what the deep state is and how big it is. If the deep state is willing to bring about 9/11, if the deep state is willing to have an assassination of a President JFK, do you think they really care about 70 million Americans and Trump wanting change? No, we see what has happened in this era of populism. This is one of the reasons why they're rushing so much to try to proclaim Biden and Harris as president and vice president without even getting certified yet, is because the desperation that the populism movement that's risen. You think that when they saw the rallies in every single state, including New York, San Francisco, etc., that the globalists and the elitists, the corporatists weren't scared to death Of course they're scared to death, because just recently, within the last 10 days, the the war occurring with Armenia and I think it's Azerbaijan, when they called for the ceasefire, the people stormed the parliament and hung the Speaker of their House. The populism movement and frequency is here now. If you remember the 1960s was a pseudo-populism movement. It was against the Vietnam War. It was for civil rights. It was for free love. It was for all these things. As a matter of fact, it's ironic that free speech was talked about in this speech by JFK, because Berkeley made its famous writ on campus that free speech, no matter what, would be protected on the campus. And here, during the Trump years, they rescinded it.
Yeah, pretty amazing. You know, Ken, I've always stated, and I think where it really hit me was that it was 3 years ago, and I had the opportunity. One of my nephews was getting married in Dallas, and had the opportunity to tour the Texas Depository, the book depository, and go through all the different interactive, the pictures and understanding. And I believe that there was a former Russian president, I can't remember who it was, that actually went through the depository as well and was like, well, it's easy to understand what happened to JFK after you learned about all the documented, all the things that he was doing, whether it was the ban on nuclear weapon tests. He was trying to broker a deal with Russia in regards to an era of peace, prosperity, of what he directly spoke about. And it didn't hit me until the moment when I went up to the room, the room where allegedly that the shot was fired, and then, walking down to that area. And it's like, it took its toll on me. I was like, I became emotional. I'm like, how can we as Americans heal until we understand the magnitude of this day that literally changed the course of our republic, forever. And I think that's why it's just so important for the conversation that we're having and documenting this on the 57th anniversary. And we're not the only ones. I think it took a lot of time. And, that's why I laugh whenever we get labeled or people deem coverage nowadays as conspiracy theory, because more than likely, a lot of the conspiracy things that take time eventually reveal themselves and come true. And then there's been awakening by several people who have said, well, wait a minute, maybe we should question some things that took place. And I want to play this real brief discussion because one of these movies that did that was Oliver Stone's JFK movie. It by far opened up a lot of people into perhaps understanding some of the facts that were not discussed, revealed. But I want to play this part real quick, Ken.
I'm like, Jesus Christ, they killed the president and they covered it up.
Yeah, and we're paying for it to this day, because I think Mr. Kennedy was one of the really on the road to being a great president. I think he did a lot of great things that people don't even know. And we put that in the documentary. What he was actually doing in Africa, people don't know. What he was doing around the world, in Asia, in Cuba, obviously, South America, what his plans were. People don't understand that there was a big divide between Lyndon Johnson, who he was about to get rid of him as vice president for the next election. There was a big divide in thinking between Kennedy and Johnson. Kennedy was without doubt pulling out of the war. There was a directive. We bring it up from the SecDef conference in Hawaii from earlier that year. He was pulling out. He made that very clear.
Well, there was also the Northwoods document, which is really crazy.
Shocking. Yeah, that's crazy.
Shocking when you actually, because this is not speculation or any kind of conspiracy theory. This is all from the Freedom of Information Act, signed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They were going to blow up a jet airliner and blame it on the Cubans. They were going to arm Cuban friendlies and attack Guantanamo Bay. They're going to do all this to get us to go to war with Cuba.
Yeah.
And it's stunning that this is an actual plan by the United States government, vetoed by Kennedy.
Wasn't there a plan also to fly a plane into a building, as I remember?
I don't know if there was. There was a plan to blow up a drone jetliner. They were going to take a jetliner, fly it, and blow it up in the sky, and and attribute all these deaths to that.
That came about, actually, the Northwoods came about as a result of the movie, because that was what was found by the Assassination Records Review Board.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's one of many documents that have come out. That's why it's important for my safe space, peace of mind to finish this thing. It's kind of like, okay, this is the end. I have to just put down the evidence, because I couldn't do it in a film.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to get to. Like, what is it like when you have this passion for this story, and this is a critical story in the history of the United States, and a clear piece of, I mean, it's a clear historical record of an assassination of a president, and most likely I don't know, who do you think was behind it?
I think I'm not going to, get sued because they're all dead, but I think that Alan Dulles has to be looked at a lot closer. And I think he was no longer in the CIA, but he had a tremendous amount of influence. And I think he needed some very organized top people to help him. So I think it could have been a group of people that were involved, and maybe involving certain people in the Pentagon too, because there was an awful lot of strange things that happened.
Yeah, he certainly had some ideas that didn't jive well with the people that were in power.
Dulles was fired by Kennedy. Let's call a spade a spade, which had never been done.
Right.
This was a shock to the American way of government. I mean, we come from a pro-military system, and here was Kennedy questioning it. And then, when after he was killed, I mean, it was insane for Lyndon Johnson to appoint him to the Warren Commission, where he managed to control pretty much the hearings and who was heard, who wasn't heard, and what the CIA was delivering to it was a joke. It was transparent, a joke.
There's a couple things that are a joke. Arlen Specter being the guy who comes up with the magic bullet theory is another joke.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that that's just very.
We can stop it there, Ken, because obviously I think that gives a little bit of context into the amount of people that were questioning the documents, the history of it, and trying to come to some type of understanding of what happened that day, Ken.
Oh, exactly. And that's the thing about it is these events, Alan Dulles, he was the precursor leading up to the creation of the CIA. Like I said, he actually went over to Germany and was part of the pipeline that brought the Nazi intelligence agents, the Nazi scientists over. And Dulles then was fired after the Bay of Pigs incident, and he ended up on the Warren Commission and controlling the whole, creating the conspiracy theory. But one of the reasons why they wanted the Vietnam War is because the other thing that I didn't mention that JFK was going to do was he was going to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. He wasn't going to just completely eradicate it, but it was going to be so broken up that it would not have the power and organization that it did. And so the CIA, because of that, when JFK was talking about this, Congress actually passed a law or an appropriations bill threatening the funding for the CIA. So the CIA then realized that if we were going to be able to do all the work that we wanted to do, and obviously Oliver Stone's got his movie where there's a lot of truth into it. Yes, it's partial fiction, but it's a lot of truth. There's another movie that was out there. It's called The Good Shepherd, and I think it was Matt Damon and Robert De Niro. And it was really about the creation of the CIA. And if you see that movie, they said in that movie, the creation of the CIA was a special intelligence organization to protect the elites. That's the entire purpose of the CIA, to protect the elites, i.e. the globalists, the corporatists, etc. So he was going to shatter that. So the CIA needed a funding source. And when the Vietnam War opportunity came, they knew about the drug trade going on in the Iron Triangle there in Southeast Asia, and they got in on it. This is the reason it was unlawful. It was actually illegal to go into Cambodia and Laos, but it was the CIA that was their primary. If it's illegal for everybody else, then that's where you function. It's the same thing we had with Obama. Barack Obama, his stepfather, Satoru, they were in Indonesia at a time when it was illegal for U.S. citizens to live or visit Indonesia. So if you want to stay under the radar, you go where nobody else can go watch you play. This, of course, when the Southeast Asia market started drying up, that's when Iran-Contra was then brought about, so they could get the cocaine and the crack from South America. Now, of course, we know that the reason they want us to stay in Afghanistan is to protect the heroin fields. Think about this. If a peace treaty, ceasefire and peace treaty is done in Afghanistan between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and the U.S. pulls out troops, Taliban is going to go right back to what they did before and burn all the poppy fields. Exactly. And so the CIA's funding is going to be in absolute jeopardy. And because Trump is a precursor to wanting to pull out the troops, Gina Haspel, the head of the CIA, has been a significant player. And for those who listened to the podcast yesterday with Jim Willie and I, Jim laid out a potential scenario he's heard, but there's another thing that came about a week ago. Sidney Powell called for Gina Haspel to be fired because of her ties to the election software in Dominion.
Yes, Ken, you're exactly right. So for people tuning in, listening, so fast forward that, and why we're building the case, why we're showing the history of these alphabet agencies that existed and their covert operations. We've documented this today. History has also the numerous times in regards to the development of technologies to interfere with not only elections here in the U.S., but also foreign elections. I believe that's probably where it did begin in Latin America and so forth, and then it was exported to utilized here. And you and Jim yesterday did a fabulous job of documenting that and discussing it, Ken.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because I'm pretty sure Trump and the allies, we'll call them the white hats for better lack of the term. Interesting thing, there's one guy who's actually a neocon, but I think his loyalty to Trump is very high, and that's Mike Pompeo. I think Mike Pompeo is somebody who's willing to go to the mat for Trump, even though he is a warmongering neocon. But with that being said, let's take a look at something that came out in 2018, and I really think they did this following the election. They knew the fraud of the 2018 election where the Democrats retook the House. They knew that the fraud was big, so they had to start preparing in advance. So back in September 12th, 2018, an executive order was created, the imposing of certain sanctions in the event of foreign interference in a United States election. Now, the assumption, of course, is foreign interference being, okay, is Russia, China, if somebody is here. But the way it's worded, it doesn't matter if it's a foreign government. Anything that occurs that affects the election on foreign soil is part of this thing. So here's the key points. The ability of persons located in whole or in substantial part. It doesn't separate, doesn't say foreign persons, it says any persons outside the United States to interfere in or undermine public confidence in U.S. elections, including through the unauthorized accessing of election and campaign infrastructure or the covert distribution of propaganda and disinformation, constitutes an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and the foreign policy of the United States. Now, what this also says is at the very end of that paragraph, should any of this be determined, I hereby declare a national emergency to deal with this threat.
Wow.
Thus, let's get to another part that you brought up today. The special operations leader to report directly to the acting defense secretary. Guess who was fired recently? Defense Secretary Epps. Why did they fire him? So that they could get somebody in there who would go along with sending special forces to do a raid in Germany to get the Dominion servers.
Bingo. Yeah, this is fascinating, and why I kind of titled this podcast "Echoes of JFK." Crazy enough, and I think Jim had the best word to describe the feelings, or feeling jazzed about it. I love when Jim was like, "I'm jazzed about all this." Was that, crazy enough, it was JFK who drafted this article, this memo 57, way back then, in regards to the use of paramilitary, dark operations that took place, and really kind of revoking that and taking that away from the CIA. And here we are, 57 years past the date of the assassination of JFK, and now we're seeing this Article 57 invoked by the Department of Defense. I'm just really this. To me, it's just almost kind of like the modern day shot heard around the world that like people aren't even discussing.
Yeah, exactly. And in the end, the decision for America is not going to be, and this ties into also the Great Reset that has been proclaimed recently by a number of people. Is that the fact that we are at it's not necessarily a crossroads, but it's a turning point. In reality, the republic that is America died in 1864, because with the 13th and 14th Amendments, it brought about federalism, and states no longer had dominion like they were supposed to for the first 70 years or first 80 years of the republic. So it was now a federalist government, and from that federalist government, we saw more and more where the federal government had virtually all control over dictates and mandates. The funny thing when it comes to, somebody made an interesting point recently to me. Why is it in Michigan are we only looking at the Dominion data in regards to the president? Why can we not look into the data regarding the Senate race between, I believe, John Jacobs and a Democrat? And I made the point that in the Constitution, the presidential election is controlled, or the way it's voted is done by the state legislatures. Back when the Constitution was written, there was no direct election of senators. Senators were appointed by the legislatures themselves. So why would they need to worry about an election for something that wasn't back then, until we saw, I believe, the 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators?
Yes. So Ken, I want to make sure to clear this up, because again, this is National Security Action Memorandum 57 that you can, easily find just by Googling that. And because I know that people do a lot of speculation, a lot of, quote unquote conspiracy things, but these are things that are actually factual that are there. So, and how we know this was implemented is because there was an actual press briefing in regards to this. And you can go to the U.S. Department of Defense and find where they were kind of celebrating that this took place under Christopher Miller, who is the Director Assistant Secretary for the Defense Operation, and the time turning that. So I want to play just a brief part. And again, this is factual. This has been implemented. And so here we go.
Acting Secretary Miller and distinguished guests, we are gathered today for a signing ceremony to implement the reforms outlined in Section 922 of the fiscal year 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. For nearly 4 years, the Department of Defense has planned and prepared to implement this important legislation. It not only strengthens the role of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict as the senior civilian for special operations within the department, but it also reinforces the partnership with the commander of the United States Special Operations Command. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have opening remarks from the Acting Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, Mr. Ezra Cohen.
Thank you, Jim. Mr. Secretary, on behalf of the men and women of U.S. Special Operations, especially Army Special Operations, welcome home. We are honored that you have returned to your roots on this historic day on hallowed ground. Today, the Department of Defense has started the process of formalizing what we have long known, the fundamental role of U.S. Special Operations in defense and foreign policy by elevating Special Operations forces to a level on par with military departments as authorized and directed by Congress. As we enact these reforms, we follow the vision of President John F. Kennedy, who predicted the rise of special operations nearly 60 years ago. He foresaw, quote, another type of war, new in its intensity, ancient in its origin, that would require a whole new kind of strategy, a wholly different kind of force, forces which are too unconventional to be called conventional forces, which are growing in number and importance and significance. President Kennedy gave these remarks at the opening of the nuclear age, when the Pentagon was primarily organized to plan and direct large conventional operations against superpowers, not special operations short of overt declared conflict. The global demands for special operations forces then and now has confirmed President Kennedy's foresight. And now, under the leadership of President Trump, we are fully realizing President Kennedy's prescient view of special operations forces. It is fitting that we are again entering an era of great power competition as we gather to affirm the importance of the special operations community. Then as now, I know special operations forces will play a vital role. And by the historic reforms we have enacted today, we will ensure Special Operations Forces has a civilian advocate commensurate to the secretaries of the other military departments. I am honored to serve as your service secretary. Thank you very much.
Ken, thoughts on that?
Yeah, one of the more interesting things is special operations. Special operations, of course, were normally under the guise of the Joint Chiefs. They were under the guise of the military generals, commanders, et cetera, commandants. But in this case, it goes directly to the executive branch. If you think about it, Allen Dulles ordered behind JFK's back having the Pentagon pull air support for the Bay of Pigs, and because that was the Pentagon went ahead and they hated Kennedy, they went along with it, and of course Dulles was the only one who was it was his baby. But now it's going to be directly under the Secretary of Defense, which means then it's Secretary of Defense is directly under Trump, or whoever the president is. The president will have complete control over any special operations that are done. It's not going to be done willy-nilly by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, by the military branches themselves, or even by the CIA, who co-ops special forces to do their dirty work.
Yes, that's very important. So think of all the stealth. Think of the drones actions that take place under that. For those listening in who either questioned or wondered if we're asking questions, looking for proof of the struggle or the challenges that are occurring behind the scenes in regards to the battle against the swamp or the deep state. Here's your proof. And I'm saying that for someone that was a skeptic, that someone kept looking for proof to say, show me, please let there be a sign that this is happening behind the scenes. And let's be thankful at this point that other than some acts of Antifa and some other things, that there hasn't been at this point yet any type of escalation of violence or anything. But whether you're a Democrat, a Libertarian, a Republican, listening to this stream, I want to ensure you that this magnitude speaks to the volume of our republic and the transparency through our elections and the people having a voice through that process. And I think that's why it's just so important to get this right. And Ken, earlier you were talking about revealing, like, why aren't we questioning some of the House and the Senate races? I specifically believe now, I think there is some proof of this. The prosecuting attorney spoke about this a little bit, is I think that's why you're having right now so many Republicans that are coming out and saying, hey, it is time for Trump to put this election past us. We need to go ahead and move on, is because both Democrats and Republicans probably use this software, because think about it, it's been used throughout the country. And that's why they're having such a difficulty, because it's going to expose all of them. Ken, it's going to expose all of the fraud.
Well, true, but the fact of the matter is that most congressmen, both Senate and the House, it's not necessarily that they're tied or they fear the software, but they're all compromised by the powers that be. They're all funded by corporations. It's like the Koch brothers. We used to, for a time, we used to say, yeah, the Koch brothers, we finally have some conservative billionaires that are supporting whatever. And then you find out that really they support the neocons. They don't support the regular rank and file. And because of that, what you're having is, I'm reminded of a story from, I think, a gentleman named Mike Horowitz. He was running for Congress in Waxman's, I forget Waxman's first name, in California, and he was campaigning. He had a decent amount of money. He wanted to do debates. Waxman refused to do debates. Waxman did not even show up in the district the entire time during the campaign thing. The polls showed that that Horowitz had a 3-point lead going in. When the votes were counted, Waxman won 80% to 20%. It was already in the, Waxman already knew it. The corruption statewide in California, and that's the problem, is statewide elections like that, even though it is a federal election, what can they do? No, where was Congress? Where was the president all those years that the corruption all across the country has been going on until recently? The reason it's recently is because the Republicans in Trump finally have someone willing to stand to the mat. Mitt Romney got cheated. He won the election. He got cheated by the thing, but he's part of the deep state. He doesn't care. He probably, like Bernie Sanders, got another vacation home and a little bit of money, some movement into a few $1 million here. It doesn't matter. If you remember, Hillary was leading Obama going into South Carolina. Then all of a sudden, Feinstein had this big secret meeting where they both went to Virginia over the weekend. When they came out, instantaneously, Obama won the primaries. And Hillary said, she was told, it's not your time. They already planned. See, the reason Trump is an anomaly, and it's why an Ivy League professor came out and said, we must change the Constitution so that individuals like Trump are never elected again. What are individuals like Trump? People who are not controlled by the system. Okay? When it comes to the two-party system, some people complain that, the third-party candidate stole votes from whatever. We can't have that. Well, that's the bad, the mindset that they've got you in, is you're not allowed to be outside of the controlled system. They don't care who's president. They give you the illusion of choice by Republican or Democrat, but they control both of them.
Yes.
The problem is that they did not control JFK. They did not control Trump. And that's why this is such a major, major, major issue. Yeah,
it's a very unique opportunity for for, again, I think that, and I think I heard this from someone in regards to the next decade that we're approaching as being the year of disclosure. And I think this presents a wonderful time, an opportune time for the president to release and disclose. So maybe we will see now, are these secret archives that have yet to be released in regards to the JFK documents, are they going to like say, hey, this is who did it, whatever? No, they're not going to, but hopefully it will help connect some of the dots and for people to get a better understanding of what took place. And that's just in regards to these documents that are there. So and in part, Ken, I think that's why it's just so important in regards to what we keep hearing in regards to the reset, the things occurring, is that they can't afford to have North America or to have the Republic, the United States, with an administration like Donald Trump. They need someone who's going to confide to that world order, someone like Biden that's going to help to usher that in.
True, but here's the reality, and Paul is correct in this, and we're in agreement on it. Those who are wanting this great reset, the world order, and that, you know what? They're like Pelosi. They're in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, the George Soroses. They are desperately trying to hold on to a status quo, the status quo that's been around since the death of JFK. And for those 70 years, they've had U.S. hegemony pretty much economically, politically, foreign policy-wise, etc. They have lost that, but they don't see it yet. And they think the Great Reset is, we're going to offer you something new, but it's really an attempt to hold the status quo. Fact is, the world has changed. And, you know, one of my favorite all-time axioms is the learners will inherit the earth, while the learned will find themselves completely able to function in a world that no longer exists.
Wow. Yep. Very powerful. Ken, great conversation today. And again, for those tuning in, this is a public live stream. You can go to our multi-channel site, which is thegadfly.vhx.tv. You can find the work of our great contributors, Jim Willey, Lennon Paul, and Ken Shortgun Jr. It's just so important right now for people to get their information from people that spend some time researching, that are going to, give you the information, provide it in factual manners. Because let's face it, it's a struggle right now with the era of disinformation coming at us to get accurate information. So you can sign up for free for a 30-day subscription, and then you can decide whether to renew at $10 a month or save a little bit of money and do $100 a year. Ken, before you wrap this session up, any closing thoughts?
No, the only thing I've got to say is remember your Yogi Berra. It ain't over till it's over, because even if Trump doesn't win the election, it's still not over.
Very well said. Ken, thank you so much. And for those people listening in, I appreciate you tuning in today. So Ken, enjoy your afternoon, and we'll do this again soon.
Thanks, everyone.